Hey guys, welcome. That time of the week again. Get together. We get to chat about building props. Always a lot of fun. I'm going to kind of get a couple things lined up here as people start to join in. I hope everybody had a good Mother's Day. And get this started here. Hey Miles, how you doing? Good to see you. Hello Allison. Happy Mother's Day to everybody out there. I hope you either enjoyed it as mothers or got to enjoy the time with your mom. Trying to get a couple things lined up here for the show tonight. I am going to put a link in here. You're going to probably want this as we go along. So you may want to open this up in a window. I know, Miles, this is your job. So I won't be stealing your job for the night, but I just wanted to get this out there. And this one. Come on. Hey Will, how you doing? Good to see you could make it tonight. So there's one of the videos too I'm going to be talking about early in the presentation tonight. So you might want to open that up in a window, or even as we're waiting for people to join in here, you might want to watch that first video a little bit, especially, let's see, let me get into how far into this video. 40 seconds into that video shows some of the close-ups of a mechanism that I built before I got into the Actibotics, when I was still building all my brackets and stuff, and we're going to talk about that to get started. And then we'll go into some of the more detailed stuff. Hey, Brian. Long time no see. Good to see you, Dan. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. The latecomers, again, today being a special holiday, I'm not sure how many people we'll have in here tonight. I hope you all had the opportunity to have a very enjoyable Mother's Day and celebrate it with families and all of that. And what we're going to be talking about tonight, I had a request last week from Richard that we go into, well, in fact, from a couple of people, talk a little bit about the mechanism, the servo mechanisms that I use. We'll get into the controllers just a little bit. We'll talk about some of the things I use to control these and how I go about assembling, some of these skeletal bodies that I use. So that's what we're going to start out with tonight. So grab a drink, settle down. As always, I'm going to try and keep this down under an hour. I have not been able to do that yet. The goal when I started this was to keep it down to 30 to 60 minutes. We have not been able to do that yet. You guys have still had plenty of questions, so that's good. As long as you guys are asking questions and want to keep going, it's fine with me. I'll be happy to keep going. So what we're going to start out with tonight, before we even get into the mechanisms, I wanted to touch base a little bit, give a little servo background, a little information on that for those that maybe are just getting started doing this stuff. I think you guys all know what a servo is. Oh, I got a big one here. I'll actually open this one. larger size, but it shows up better. So, a lot of different brands of servos. And for those of you watching, if you get annoyed with everything being backwards, watch it on YouTube when I post it again on YouTube. All of this will be reversed, so all the labels and everything are going to read forward. But, there's high-tech, there's Futaba, Tower servos. There's a lot of off-brands you can use. There's some expensive brands you can use. Personally, my suggestion is find a brand you like and stick with it. I really like the high-tech servos, and especially the digital servos. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between, there's two different styles, analog servos and digital servos. We'll chat a little bit about that and why I like these. The analog servos certainly have a place. They're the old technology, and they're actually slowly being phased out. Before too long, I would imagine we won't be able to get analog servos anymore. They'll go totally over to digital. The nice thing about digital, they've got quite a few advantages, actually. One, they have better holding power. Once you get that set where you want it, the servo will hold its position better, which is a big asset for us. Another thing, using a programmer, you are actually able to purchase the servos in their stock configuration, which usually saves you some money. If you go change from the stock rotation and you go to counterclockwise, they usually charge you $10. If they've got a couple other things that you can set with a programmer and a digital servo. So you can set the limits, which is really great for building the characters. Come back here into the screen a little bit, buddy. When you're building these characters, I may be able to get this arm to come all the way up, but as you can see, I can drive that all the way until it's making contact with the bracket. I don't want that. I don't want it to slam into that. So I'm going to set my servo limit so that no matter what I do, no matter what I program this to do, it's going to stop right there. That's as far as it's going to go. And that's a real valuable thing to be able to do. So having a programmer, you can do that. You can set the speeds. A lot of times, if I'm using a servo, it may be moving faster, especially with these guys, moving faster than I want. I can slow him down so that the motion looks more natural. And I can also reverse them. There's certainly ways, if you've got the standard rotation, if you want to reverse the direction of travel on here, you can go in and hack them. You can buy a little inline servo reverser. Again, cost you money, and it's another component that can fail. But using the programmer, I can actually go in there and reverse it and not have to pay for it. So certainly a way to save some money. As well. Now, of course, all those benefits do not come without their own cost. Digital servos as a whole are going to be a little bit more expensive, but I don't know, Richard, as far as the programmer. I've got a couple of the different high-tech programmers. The one I'm using right now is the high-tech HFP-30. It's this one. I also have one of the older ones, a 25, which doesn't do some of the newer servos, which is why I actually had to upgrade. And I'm really pleased with the upgrade because, my eyes are going bad, and I love that big screen off the new 30. So that's the one I'm using now. This certainly will work for most of the servos, but some of the new ones it will not work for. So you have to have the upgraded programmer. So that's what I use. For those of you that are just joining, I did put a couple of links in the comments. You may want to pull those pages up and have those tabs open. There's a video on YouTube, one of my early videos. We're going to be talking about some stuff you might want to refer to that. And there's also the high-tech spec sheet from Servo City. So Servo City does stock a couple of different, they have Futabas and the high-techs. and they will show, they've got the charts for both of them. But again, I use the high-techs. I like the high-techs, and that's personally what I use. Is everything still live, or is it only my laptop that froze up? You guys still, are we still good? Not sure. Which one is that, Miles? The video link isn't good? Or the one from Servo City? And large size, are you referring to the servo? Yeah, this is a standard size servo. And this is the large one. And I'll talk about why I'm using this large one here in a little bit. I'm really using it for demos today because it's bigger. It's a lot easier to see. So, but we'll talk about that too. So anyway, if you're just joining us, you might want to pull up those links, because I want to talk about some alternative ways besides some of the stuff that I do. If you're on a budget and maybe want to just get started on some of this stuff, there certainly are some other ways that you can certainly save some money. So that's kind of the basics on the servos. If you have any other questions about that or anything as we go along, please post them in the comments. I'll try and keep up with that as we go along. And for the servos that I use, some of my favorites for the 3-axis skulls, you can certainly get along with using, let's go over there, using analog servos, because we're going to be setting the servo limits on these in the programmers that we use. And I know most of you guys that follow me know that I use either the Frankenstein, my Frankenstein, or Steve's Bjork's Banshee to control these. And in the programming, in the setup, we are actually going to set the servo limit. So it's not quite as important. Speed's not quite as important in that. So you can certainly get away with some analog servos. The 425 BBs, high-techs, will work. They've always been the standard of the industry for 3-axis skulls. I have since moved up with mine, going to the 485s. Those are my favorites now for the 3-axis, the rotation, the tilt, and the jaw. And then for the nod, I still am using, for the mask setups, the linear actuators we talked about last week. And, they plug in just like a servo does. They're 3-pin connectors. They respond like the servos do. So, these are from Actuonics. And again, they've got the 3-pin header and plug in just like a servo does. Okay? They are, Michael, the limits, when we set them on the analog servos, we have to set them on the board. Okay? Because they do not have the ability to set servo limits on the servo. With the digital servo, however, they're stored inside the actual servo. So they'll retain those on the servo, these limits. So I'm not doing anything with these. Well, we do. But you can set the limits on these in the servo with the digital servos. Okay. Miles, that should not be the Papa Voodoo video. That should be the animatronic skeleton prototype. If that's the wrong link, Miles, if you wouldn't mind going to my page, I think it's on the 4th page of my videos. It was a video from 2012. So again, it's an old video, but I want you guys to take a look at that, because I want to talk about some of the ways to get started doing this without making the heavy investment that is kind of necessary if you're going to go this route. Okay, any other questions on servos? Can we move on? No questions. Okay. Let us move along. Now, when we're actually building the mechanisms, again, there's a lot of different methods to go about doing this. Before we talk about the actobotics, let me know where they're. Okay. Before I did this, in that very first that video that I posted, I hope works. If not, Miles is looking for it, and maybe he can give us a different link. I'm going to try again, see if we can. See if that link worked. Ah, there it came up on my screen now. So that's the one that shows the animatronic skeleton when I first started building these and trying to articulate the upper bodies, and kind of shows a close up and of some of the shoulder mechanism and the elbow mechanisms. And when I got started, I used to build all of my brackets. I would be out in the metal shop, out in my garage, and cutting. Most of them were out of aluminum, cutting them, bending them, drilling them, fitting them to work. So, I was doing all of these bars and everything here. You certainly can make your own, save you some money. Aluminum's fairly easy to work with standard metal or tools, hacksaws. Having a portable bandsaw is certainly a big addition to your shop if you don't own one. I wouldn't do metal work without it. And you can get them fairly inexpensively. I got one from Harbor Freight, about $80, and just replace the crappy blade that comes from Harbor Freight, and put a good blade on from Home Depot, and that makes quick work of cutting not only aluminum but steel too. It's just so much nicer than using my cutoff saw to cut metal. So that's my favorite way, my favorite tool to cut this. But you can go through and cut it, and I still make a lot of these brackets and stuff for mine. This is a bracket. I'm in the process of putting together a pneumatic pop-up for our all-day seminar at the Halloween and Hauntfest show in Dallas in August. And instead of buying the $4 brackets, I'm going to end up making 20 of these for everybody, so we can just bolt these in and save everybody $4. But a lot of those brackets, it's a lot easier it's not a big job to make them. Again, cutting this with my metal saw, grinding off the edges and rounding them off a little bit, and then drilling the holes with the drill press. It takes me, 2 minutes to make one of these brackets. So I do still go out and make a lot of them. Wait, come back. Now, going to give you kind of a little secret that I use, and one of my favorite ways to make some of these joints with some pre-made materials that are really cheap. This is one of my favorite tools or favorite parts, and this is from Home Depot. This is a little Lazy Susan ball bearing wheel caster, and what I do is drill out the riveted piece that holds the wheel in, take the wheel out, and now I have got a 2-axis, I've got screw holes here now I can attach my arms to. So now I've got this motion, and then I can pivot on this motion right here. So I can make that into a shoulder joint, into an elbow. Well, shoulder joint is better, because now I can get this motion and I can move my arm up and down by attaching it to these points here. A couple $3, $3-4, whatever it is, at Home Depot. Now you have got a 2-axis mechanism pre-made for you, running on bearings. I mean, you can't get any simpler than that. And I like the ones with the plastic wheels. They're easy to get off. I've also used ones with metal wheels and try to attach metal pieces and screw them onto there. For me, I find it's easier if I just take this wheel off totally, don't even use it, and just use these holes here as a pivot point for my other motion. So if you're on a budget and you want a real simple way to be able to make that actual joint, here it is. Now, of course, you still have got to attach servos somehow to this to actually make those pieces move, but now you at least have built that joint for the shoulder, and it hasn't cost you much, pretty easy, quick and easy to do. So, this is a method to do that. And again, that video that I posted there, shows a little bit about what I did when I first got started putting mine together. And I've come a long way since then. I certainly, that's certainly a viable option to do if you want to go that and you're on a budget. But I have now pretty much gone, when I am making my mechanisms, to the Actibotics. And it allows me to get a whole lot more torque. It also allows me to build these a whole lot faster when I'm putting these things together. And do the adjustments. It's a lot easier. Everything is made to fit. Let's see. They have the channel, and the channel has got the bolt pattern. Let's see if I can get it up there. That all the channel gearboxes mount onto. It's easy to adjust, your lengths. Quick to put together. They carry all the brackets, all the hardware, all the adapters, depending on what you want to use. As far as arms, I've gone to tubing, which works really well for me, and then I just pat them up. But this is what I've gone to for most of mine for building them. I put this guy, not counting his head. Let's see if I can give you guys a little more picture. This is the one that traveled with me to St. Louis to Transworld. He's got 3 big servos, 3 channel gearboxes for each arm, and then a big one on the base down there, which is controlling rotation of the upper body. And then, of course, the completed one is going to have 3 servos and a linear actuator to get the upper body, or to get the head to work. So, if we don't have any more questions on that, any other thoughts, ideas on brackets, anything you guys have done that's worked well for you, please post it down in the comments. Share it with everybody. Let's, all learn from each other, and put it down in the comments. So, Richard wanted to know which servos I use, and I'm going to post. These are the channel gearboxes from Servo City that I use. That is the link. And when you get where you can kind of go back and go back through the menu system there and to see all the ones that they offer. The channel ones are the ones that I like. If you go back a couple links there, it will show all 3 of them, or all 4 of them. You can get them in several different layouts. You can get them for the channel. You can get top mounts where they go on the brackets, and the mounting brackets are on top. You can get them in a square tube, or you can get them in a bottom flange. And this is the one for this big servo that I am now using to mount the entire upper body on. This is what's going to turn the upper body. And so I wanted to totally overbuild it. This is certainly overkill for what I'm using it for. Servo's going to mount. I haven't gotten to assembling this one yet, but this mounts down into it, and that's what I'm using to mount the whole entire upper body on. But I wanted something very stable, very strong, that didn't have any wobble in it, and this is working really well. So I am in the process of going through and redoing Big Red. Jarvis his upper body probably will not get done, but this guy is on that too. So if you're looking at these, you've got a selection. You can actually buy the gearboxes just by themselves and put whatever servo you want into them, which is certainly an option. However, the advantage and the reason that we're using these channel gearboxes is because we can gear these up with a big, huge gear set and get incredible torque out of these, which alleviates one of the major problems with servos is lack of torque. So, we are gearing up. These are the 7-to-1 gears on here. So we're getting an incredible amount of torque. So you don't really need to go in with the high-end servos. The one that they do on the set, their basic one is a HS 5485 HB servo. And going back to our chart, let's see. At 4.8 volts, we're getting 72 ounce inches, and at 6 volts, we're getting 89. So roughly about the same as a 485 analog servo, just a little bit more, but it's a digital servo. But once you add the gearing, you're getting a tremendous amount of additional torque. 4,500 ounce inches. Let me pull one up and see. And if you go to that individual site that I said, they actually put in there down in the description, there is a little chart that shows exactly how much torque and what you're going to do to your speed. Yes, you do. It does have speed on there. As you go up in torque. Of course, as you increase the torque, increase the gearing to get more torque, your motion is going to be slower. But at 7-to-1, even at 4.8 volts, you can increase that 72 ounce inches to 504 ounce inches of torque. So tremendous upgrade by being able to gear these up. Most of the ones that I do, I know Richard was asking also, I am usually using the 5-to-1 or the 7-to-1 gearing on mine. Again, for me, the biggest thing is torque. I always want to get as much strength in my arm as I can to be able to lift things, costuming, everything, all the padding, everything else. Torque is king for me, and super high speed isn't a big deal for me because they start to look too jerky, and it's hard to get the smooth action with the really fast ones. Now, one change to that is I am trying out some of the 5565s high-tech servos, and the reason that I'm going to use this, and Pat's asking a question here, for a different servo for the jaw, my idea, this servo is about twice as fast as most of the other servos, the response rate in it, and I'm going to be trying these in the jaw to see if I can get even faster response to the jaw, where I really want to be able to get that crisp, quick movement in there. So this is one instance where, for me, speed is probably going to be a big thing, and I'm not going to use these servos everywhere because they are expensive. So if you can get away, my whole thing is you want to get away with or use the cheapest servo you can get away with. But this particular servo, I think they're like $65 a piece, $70 a piece. So I'm not going to use this if a $24 or $25 servo is going to do the job. And for most of this stuff, it is going to do the job. If you're not able to lift something with 500 or 600 ounce inches of torque, maybe it's time to move to pneumatics. So this is one difference as far as the jaw servo goes. Again, most of my 3-axis servos, I am using the high-tech 485s. And they seem to work real well for me. If I'm trying to drive a jaw in a mask, and the mask is very restrictive, I sometimes have to go to a bigger servo. My witch scene, I burned a 485 up trying to drive that mask. It was just too tight, and actually did move up to a, I think I put in there a 5685. I really like those 5685s for just using it for a servo, because they're about double the torque of a 5485. So 5685s, yeah. And they also, you have to look at some of these servos when you're purchasing them. Don't just look at the torque rating. You also want to look at the voltage. Some of these servos work at 4.8 to 6 volts, and some of them work 6 volts to 7.4 volts. And if you really need to get the extra torque, you can go with a servo that can operate at 7.4 volts, but just don't mix a 7.4 volt power supply and have on the same bus a servo that uses 4.8. You're going to cook it. So you also want to check that when you're looking at some of these. Don't just go down that torque column and go, oh, that's the one with the most torque on it, so that's what I'm going to use. Sometimes the reason they get so much torque is because we're pushing 7.4 volts through them. So just be conscious of that when you're mixing different servos onto your servo bus. Again, those are all standard size servos, all digital for the body, pretty much analog for the 3-axis skulls, just because I can get away with them. The servos do not work, none of these servos at least work at 12 volts. So when I'm putting my programmers together, usually now we are separating the servo power from the controller power, and we may be running 12 volts or 5 volts, depending on what we need for the programmer, through the programmer, and then we're setting our servos on their own power supply. That also really helps with jitter. A lot of times with different control boards, you get jitter in your servos. You'll get that servo kind of, even when it's at rest, kind of it'll get a little bit of jitter to it, and a lot of times that is because of the power supplies, using a common power supply. If you separate off that power supply that's powering your servos from what's powering your controller, that does help alleviate that to some degree. Depends on the power supply, Pat, how many I run on each power supply. Excuse me. The bodies, I am not running these off of standard wall warts. I am using power supplies with anywhere from 6 to 10 amps on them, and I'm able to run all 7 of the bodies on that. If I would be right in my programming, it's very rare that all 7 servos are moving at the same time, which helps reduce my need for power. Of course, if you're going to try and have everything happening at the same time and everything going and being used, you're going to have to up your power supply. But I use some a little more expensive power supplies than I may run. For a 3-axis skull, if I'm just running that, you can run those 4 servos in a 3-axis skull off 2 amps. But if you're finding that your servos are not acting to what you think they should, oftentimes the problem is underpowered. So, you make sure to check your power supply. If you're not getting them to respond like you think you should, you may want to up that power supply. Will, you had a question. Let me see. What was it? How do I choose the right size for a particular project? I guess. And a little bit of humor there, but to some extent that's not too out of line. There are all sorts of complicated mathematical equations and everything you can go through to figure out exactly how much you can use and what you need for a servo as far as torque. I've done this enough. I have a pretty good feel for what I need. A lot of it goes into scripting your script for your actual character. What are you going to expect out of him? If he's supposed to be lifting a big beer stein or something, Papa Voodoo or Big Red, where he's got a beer stein in his hand, or Papa Voodoo's when he was lifting skulls. I was going to drive bigger servos in there to be able to do that. For somebody that's just going to be lifting up his hand and he's got a very lightweight plastic hand on here, I can get away with something lighter. But my feeling is I'd always rather have more power, more than I need. So I'll usually say, okay, I can get by with that servo, and then go to the next one up. And try and have some in reserve. It's going to be better for your servo anyway if you're not always pushing them right to the edge of their limit. And you want to have some room at the top end there in reserve. Okay. And with that said, if you really get crazy, you can go to some of the other servos. And I've got in this particular one, this shoulder. See if I can get you that servo. This servo in this shoulder, which is the one where I'm going to be using the electromagnet. I think I get like 700 or 800 ounce inches out of this great big digital servo. But there are very few instances, I think, where any of us are going to need to have that kind of stuff. That's the only one of those servos I own. But it's a $150 servo. So, don't buy more servo than you need, but make sure that you're not pushing them all the way to the end. Have a little bit of room at the top end left over. And again, if you're getting a servo and you're running it at 4.8 volts and it runs to 6, and you need a little bit more torque, up the power supply and go to a 6-volt power supply. That's going to give you a little bit more torque. Just like the 5485 is going to get 72 ounce inches at 4.8 volts, but at 6 volts it gets 89. So another 17, what is that, 15% upgrade in your torque just by upping the power supply. So, and if you're not familiar, ounce inches, it's how many ounces it can lift, 1 inch off of the shaft. Again, you don't need to know that. It's nice having this chart because you can compare apples to apples right off on this chart and compare the different servos. So, and again, for most of my stuff, except for this one big servo that I'm using at the base, they're all the standard size servos. Okay. Yeah, I want to make that very clear. I do get some of my parts from Actibotics from Servo City. I buy a lot of my stuff from Servo City as well. So they do not provide all the parts for everything I do need, but they do give me some help with some of this stuff. So that's what allows me to make as many characters as I do using this stuff. And they're very smart. They got me started. They got me hooked, and I'm like an addict now. It's really hard for me to go back because I just really love how easy and how quick it is to assemble some of this stuff. So now, if you don't need to go all the way up, you don't need this much power. You just need to add some lateral support and some to a standard servo. These Servo Blocks kits that they have on Servo City are really cool to add a lot of lateral support here to your servo horn. So this may be an option. If you're not lifting something really heavy, this may be enough without having to go to a channel gearbox. So look at the Servo Blocks. This is another opportunity to save some money. Now, if you want to go the route that I use, and you want to go up to these channel servo mounts, like I say, I start mine off. I use the channel, different lengths. This is for a spine, and then I'm going to mount another piece on the top for the shoulders, and then my shoulder servos are going to set right inside here, and you can see this. And pull this guy out. This is Big Red's arm. one of Big Red's arms. And this was the original design I did when I was first building Big Red. And this mounted into the channel this way, and this served as his shoulder. And I really like this design because one of the issues you still have to confront once you get this built is you've got to keep your fabric from your costume out of these gears. And I designed this because it kept everything in line, and it was really easy to mask over this and keep my clothing out of these gears. And so this all turned. So it was very nice. The only problem is I hate the way, and if you go back and look at Big Red's video, there's a spot in the video, if you watch his shoulder, that this pivot point is now 3 inches below, and it's, in fact, as you taper down, you know, I'm going to put something over here to taper his shoulders into his neck. It was 4 inches, this pivot point below his shoulder, and it looks goofy. I can't stand it. I can barely watch that video, in fact, because I didn't like that. So I have fully gone back and redesigned how I'm building these now. It's in Jarvis, and it's in this guy. And I now mount, I have got this pivot point way up here on the shoulder. Much more natural look. Can we see that? Much more natural look to that bend now. But the downside to doing it this way, and I'm willing to do this just because I really like the look, much more natural now, is it's a lot more difficult to keep my fabric out of this shoulder joint because I've got this big monster gear here that will just eat fabric and suck it in. Yeah, I shouldn't be doing it as much as I do it, Bryant. But yeah, you can get away with it as long as you're not having them under load. I actually have this guy hooked up. In fact, 4 of the servos, and we'll do it properly. So, I have got a little servo, the Servo Programmer. I use this for most of my testing. It's a 4-channel servo program, see, these gears eat everything. It's a servo recorder. I don't use it for a recording option, but I do use it because it allows me to test all my motions. Come back here, other way, go up. And it allows me to test all of this. Test my speeds. So this is really the way I should be moving it. Okay. So this is just for testing. Although you can record onto this. One, it only does 4 channels, and I need, just for the body, the way the body's configured right now, without having the wrists move, which oftentimes I do have some of the wrists that also move. So I've got another servo set up here. There's still 7 servos in the body to get this to work. So we'll talk about the controller here in a little bit. But that's why I've changed the way that I lay this out to get a little bit more natural look once he's got clothing. And now that I'm making the foam body forms, I think it's really going to help be able to keep the fabric out, give nice round organic look to the upper body. It's always been a big thing trying to put bars and everything to get the fabric to lay flat, and now with the foam body forms, it really looks good. Power supplies I am running. The body's gonna have one set with the controller I'm using for that. I've got a separate power supply and controller that's doing the head. 2 different controllers, 2 different power supplies. Yeah, we're going to get into the controllers, Brian, in just a few minutes, okay? Yeah, Will, that always bothered me with Big Red, and I mean, I've almost taken that video off of my YouTube channel just because it bugs me so much to see that elbow or that shoulder rotating 4 inches below where it should be. So, again, this is the design I'm using now. I flipped over. So before this channel was this way, and now I flipped it over this way, mounted this servo in here, right in here, with an L bracket off the top that mounts right onto the face of this big gear, which is where this movement is. So much more organic, much more in line, much more anatomically correct. I'll deal with the other issues later, but it's worth it to me to do this. One reason I really love steampunk is I don't have to worry about dressing them. So Jarvis back there, where I want to show off all of this stuff, I don't have to worry about that. But you know what? We all have to worry about dressing our characters when we're done. So again, that's coming down to this channel box here. I'm just using a little 45 connector in here. These screw in a little tubing connector, and then tubing down to the next one, and then the same thing on the elbow. Let's see if I can get you this elbow. So again, it's an L bracket here, right, mounted onto the gear, which is giving me my elbow movement. Okay. Caveat. I know most people are not going to build their characters like I do. This is taking it greatly beyond what most people are going to do for their Halloween props. Yeah, this takes it from a Halloween prop that's just going to jump out and scare somebody, and you're starting to push a little bit more towards the animated characters and robotics. You can certainly get by with a lot of the characters with maybe just doing one arm. You don't have to do both arms. You just can do shoulder rotation or upper body rotation. So, you can certainly pare this down from what I do and just use it for what you need a particular prop to do. It just depends on how far you want to go. For those that were asking to build this guy right here, and using all Actobotics parts except for a couple little custom parts that I've built. Using the big servo down here, all of their brackets. The mechanical part alone is probably over $1,000. So for most of the stuff that we do, you do not have to go to this extreme. You can certainly just pick and choose the pieces out of it that you need. You can save some money when you're purchasing these. When you're buying the channel gearboxes, they come in two different forms. They've come fully assembled and soldered together, or you can buy the components separately like I do and actually make the modifications yourself, which will save you $30. So being able to buy these in standard configuration servos and then do the reprogramming with the controller, and then being able to actually do the soldering up and do the hack to get these to work saves you another $30. You can save like $50 off of each one of these, each set of gearboxes. So there's some ways to save some money, and that's how I get them. I buy them in the separate components and I build them together. Now, what does it take? There's a pretty good set of instructions. Maybe you want to, if you're going to do this and get into these, buy the first one and have them solder. But if you're halfway decent solderer and you can follow instructions, which I know I sometimes have difficulty doing, but you can do this yourself. It requires disassembling the servo. You're going to pull the potentiometer out. You're going to take the 3 wires off of there and run them back out through here and connect them to the potentiometer in here. See if you can you get those 3 little mounting points right there? So it doesn't take long. 15 or 20 minutes worth of work, but especially if you're doing multiples of these at $30 a piece, I'll solder my own together. You have to make a little bit bigger cutout here to be able to get your wires through. But again, pretty thorough instructions, pretty easy to follow the instructions. And and it's certainly a good way to save a fairly considerable amount of money. Any more questions on that before we get into the controllers? No? All right. Let me clear the table. And then we'll talk a little bit about controllers. All right. Controllers. First off, I think you guys all know, I write for Servo Magazine, and is this the right issue? December 2016, I think, is the issue. Yes, that I wrote on puppeteering. And this is how this whole article is just on using the propeller board and the programming that Brian Lincoln has developed and made available to all of us to use for using the propeller activity board to actually program in the motions here. Now, you can actually move these a couple different ways, and maybe before I get into how we do it. For Jarvis back here, he's radio controlled. I use him for live acting, so I am doing him live. I'm actually using two different radio controllers, just like you use for a remote control, airplane or boat. This is a 4-channel one, and then I've got a 12-channel one controlling him. So I've actually got two separate controllers, 4 joysticks, to be able to run him, run the motors on him, run all his servos, run the pan and tilt for the camera that's on him, and that's running his basic body components. So if you've got an actor, or you've got time, or you're making a character that's out working in your cue line, and you want to actually really be able to control who he's looking at and what he's doing, and interacting with people in line, this is certainly an option. You have a little transmitter on the character that plugs in, and you're going to be controlling him, with your receivers here. This is how Hollywood does it. I was just last 2 weeks or a week and a half ago visited Legacy Effects again. I'm in the process of writing an article for the magazine for them, and was fortunate enough that they demonstrated a couple of their characters and how they puppeteer, actually live puppeteer theirs. And, their puppeteers are acting like actors. For some of these characters that they were demonstrating to me, they had 3 separate puppeteers running. One guy's got the head, one guy's got the upper body, one guy's got the lips and the mouth, and they're all doing it by radio control. But again, they're doing it a little differently than we are doing. For the most part, most of the stuff I do, at least, I want to be able to program it, store the program, and then when the character is triggered, actually have him run through his routine on his own. I mean, I don't have time. I don't have people that can sit there and run him. I've got a remote-controlled spider that I run up and down, and even just running him, is more time than I've got a lot of times on Halloween. So what I'm trying to do is, we wanted to develop a system that we could live program these characters, store it onto a board, and then have it replayed. And again, Brian has provided that. He wrote the program for that. And what we're using as the basis for running the body movements for most of these, is the propeller activity board. Okay. This is from Parallax. And it's really nice. They've got this breadboard area that you're actually going to use. And I use that to make sure everything's running. And once it's all running properly, and I'm sorry I do not have one of these to show you. I thought I did, because I have the empty bag right here for it. But it is actually a circuit overlay board which just fits into these headers, these 3 headers here, and you actually solder in your connectors. So once I'm sure I've got it the way I want it, it's just good that overlay board gets soldered up and it gets on here, so I don't have to worry about any of my connections popping out of that breadboard. Okay, now for the skeleton and the witch, we are actually using 4 of these boards, 2 on each character. So we've got 1 controlling the head and 1 controlling the body. You can control up to 8 servos on here. Most of the time, though, most of the characters we are using for the head, random movement is just fine if I'm using a single character. I'm happy with random movement, and so for that, I am either using one of my Frankenstein boards, my 3-axis controller, or I'm using one of Steve's new Banshee boards. And this is one I'm just in the process of finishing soldering up. Steve's new board is really unique and it's nice. With my board, you actually have to go in and do a tone track to move the jaws, which is a little bit more crisp and a little bit more accurate. I still use mine a lot, but Steve's, you don't have to do that. It automatically goes in there and determines how to drive the jaw. If you're using a track that has got the audio as well as the voice in there, you're still going to want to go in and use Audacity to make that tone track. One quick comment for those of you that do use some of our older controllers and Tim's the Scuba Spook board. MD Fly has not gotten in the full-size audio cards. Well, the ones they got in, they redesigned it, and the firmware is not the same. But they did get some of the little ones that use the micro SD cards, and I'm happy to report I ordered 5 of these and tested them out. They work just like the old ones do. Perfect drop-in for my boards, for Tim's boards as well. So you'll have to wait for them to restock if you want to get them, because I bought the last ones. But they should be getting new ones in, and those are straight drop-ins. So, that's what I'm using for that. We'll do another whole episode on just how to program these and how to store that program on there. That's an hour or 2 all by itself. But that's what I use to control it. The propeller activity boards for the puppeteered body movements of the torsos and the arms, and then a random head controller, either a Banshee or a Frankenstein, to run the head. And just quickly to show you, this is the type of mechanism that we use when we are puppeteering. So this has got individual potentiometers. So here's my shoulder bending, here's the arm going up and down at the shoulder, here's my elbow, and then I've got a separate potentiometer up here for my wrist if I'm using a wrist. So this is what we actually do. We live puppeteer 4 servos at a time, 1 arm at a time. We'll do 1 arm. Then we'll play, while we're playing that 1 arm's movements back, we'll program the other arm, and then we'll manually go in and do the torso movement. And then if we don't like something, we can individually go back and either redo the whole arm, or we can just redo an individual servo. So that's how we're puppeteering them to get them to do the motions that we want. No, Michael, that board does not work on Banshee. Steve has got a little different layout. Let me pull out this audio card. And last I heard, they're supposed to be getting these in, but they didn't have them in. But this uses 3 rows of headers that go down onto his board. And a nice, we're starting to use this method quite a bit more, because we can hide components up underneath the audio card, which allows us to, add more to a board and utilize our space on the board a little better. And for those of you that have never designed boards or don't care to ever design boards, just a little reason. We have got, of course, like anything else, there are price points. So, at a 5 centimeter by 5 centimeter board is one price. If we go to 5 by 10, it goes up to the next level. If it goes 10 by 10, it goes to the next price level. So we're always trying to keep these boards down as small as we can. One, for pricing, and two, to make it easier to hide on a prop. But, that's sometimes why we'll get to a point and go, we're not ready to release a board because we got to make it just a little bit smaller. And a little more compact in order to get the size down to make it a little bit more reasonably priced. So that's something that we're always fighting with. But those are supposed to be in. If they do not get this resolved at MD Fly shortly, as far as the audio boards are concerned, I know Steve is already considering redesigning Banshee to use a different board that has got a more reliable source of parts and multiple distributors that do it. Again, I guess there's no guarantee that there isn't one guy that is making these and passing them out to a whole bunch of different distributors. But this is always an issue that we do when we're designing boards. Is sometimes parts go out of production, and then we're left scrambling trying to get old stock, or we're redesigning boards. So, hey, Tim and Jean, good to see you guys could make it. And yes, this will be up both on my Facebook page, and hopefully by tomorrow it will be on the YouTube page with all the images reversed, so everything's not backwards. So it will be back up, or it will be up for those of you guys that joined in the middle to be able to catch up either on Facebook or on YouTube. If you don't already subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Halstaff's Animatronic Workshop, go over and do that, because again, these are all over there, plus, I don't know, 140 other videos or something on my YouTube channel. So, hi Susan, yes, better late than never. Yeah, I'm just about to wrap up. I'm at my hour that I'm always trying to finish up at, but I'm certainly willing. We finished our Mother's Day celebration already, so I am certainly willing to stick around and answer questions, talk, if you want. Yeah, I had my grandkids, they left at 4 when it was nap time, so it was perfect timing for me. A couple things before we do wrap up, and I do want to cover. Next week, I'm happy to report my daughter-in-law passed her master's, and so we are having a big party at my house next Sunday. That does not mean we're not going to have this next week. It's just going to be an hour later. I need a little bit more time to kick people out of the house. So next week we will be at 6 o'clock my time, Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern time, just for next week. So that's coming for next week. So again, set your clock. Those of you that are just joining at 6 o'clock, you're same thing next week. Just join at the same time and you'll be well set. For those of you guys that were here on time at 5 o'clock, you get a little bit more time from your Sunday to go do other stuff. Build props or something. I don't have a subject for next week. I would like to do something a little less complex. So if you've got some ideas, something that you would like to see, please put it down in the comments so that we can do something, whether it's, working with wiper motors or not quite sure. Whatever you guys want, I'm certainly happy to do, but would like to kind of spread things out so it's not all the high complicated stuff every week. I don't want to scare people off. On that same note, I sure could use your guys' help as far as spreading the word. When the posts come out, I know you guys are, everybody I'm seeing at least, are subscribers to the channel. But if when you see the post come up, if you share it with some of the other groups that you belong to, it certainly carries a whole lot more weight if you guys are sharing it than if I am sharing it. So could use the help in spreading the word. The more people we get joining in on this, the more people we have providing ideas and things that have worked well for them or haven't worked well for them. We all learn from each other. So, so again, if you guys would help me spread the word to the other groups and the other interested parties, I would sure appreciate that, and I think we would all benefit by that. What else? Do I have anything else? Oh, thank you, Will. Same to your wife. Yeah, my wife is very accommodating lately about letting me do this on Friday night or on Sunday nights. We do have one thing already planned. I have another Sunday kind of conflict in the afternoon. We're doing a show on a Sunday afternoon, and I have my son Brian, who some of you guys know. He does all my photography, or 90% of my photography, video for the Haunt, and a lot of the good cover shots and stuff we do for the magazine. Brian does that, and he has volunteered to come in. We'll have a dual live episode here from his studio, his professional studio at his office, and he's going to walk us through some of the things that he does, some suggestions and ideas so that you can photograph your haunts better, and some things that you can do in post as far as the editing goes. So that we can pass on, all the great things that we're doing to everybody else. I don't know about you, but I'm not a big fan of watching black screens and listening to people scream. I want to see people's haunts and I want to see their props. So watch for that next month. I know that is an upcoming episode we'll do in June. So if you guys don't have any other questions or things that you want to cover, I think I saw somebody talk. Did somebody ask about lighting? Organization. That would be a great one. So, okay, good ideas. As far as lighting goes, I do have an article coming out in Servo. I just did that article. It's not in print yet, but I do have a lot of information, so that would be a good one to do. Yes, and Michael, we will go more into the parallax boards. I just don't want to do it in back-to-back month or weeks because I don't want to scare away some of our other builders that aren't quite into this level of robotics character development. But yes, we will be doing more of that in detail. Again, I don't mean to push my articles, but they're in the December. You can go back and buy a single issue from Servo, I think, December 2016. The whole article was on the puppeteering and programming of the parallax boards. So, there's more information there that you can get. And again, we certainly will do an episode here on Facebook dealing just with the propeller activity boards. But Tim, you may have missed it live, but you'll get to see it replayed. Again, it'll be on Facebook and it'll be on my YouTube channel. Be on YouTube within a day, I would think. I'll try and work on it tonight. I guess I got to wrap up. I'm out of cognac. Again, if you have other ideas, I'd sure like to see them on what to cover in future episodes. If you've got ideas, things that I haven't been covering that you would like to see me add in, once I announce what the topic is, if you guys have questions, it helps me a great deal if I've got those questions ahead of time. In fact, Richard's question is printed right here. In fact, did I answer that in full, Richard? Which servos and which ratio I like, 5-to-1 or 7-to-1. I use them both. And we talked about the controller. So I answered them. But again, when you guys ask more questions, this page, last week I think I had like 10 questions on here. But it helps me plan it and make sure that I have, if I've got anything to show, that I've got it on hand to make the answers more appropriate and cover the answers better for you. So please post those questions throughout the week. Share it. Yes, we should do that. Do some linkage stuff. And I'll think about how to show off some of that. That's great. I don't want to do servos every week, but that would be a great one, Tim, and we can do more of that. We can pull out some of these the different connecting rods and linkages. If you guys would like to hold on, I'll clear these off. If you would like to see the foam skin for the characters, there is a video on my page, and we can certainly go out to the patio and do an episode out there and kind of do that live and walk through some of the things I've kind of learned to make that easier. So we can do that as well. That'd be a great one, especially as things warm up. So, all right, guys, I think that's it for tonight. Not too far over my hour limit, but go enjoy the rest of Mother's Day. And again, happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And we will see you guys next week. Take care. Have a great week. Build all week. All right. Take care, guys. Good night.